and welcome to Bottom Line. Indian industry is going through an interesting phase. It, many cases, does not know whether to be optimistic or not. Our guest for today is Adi Godrej, chairman of the Godrej Group. We're going to ask him 3 or 4 key questions. Is Indian industry or companies like him feeling optimistic or pessimistic about the way things are? Secondly, what's going to take us out of this and get us back on the growth path? Mr. Godrej, thank you very much for joining us. So, first question, is it a mood of general optimism or general pessimism at this point?
Well, I think for the moment, because the GDP growth has come down, it's cyclical, I think we'll get out of it.
And I'm going to come to the reasons for that cyclicality and what we've learned from the past in a short while. What's gone right for Godrej in the last 4 years? I mean, last 4 years being the period when things have really gone all right.
Well, we have done very well because of 2 or 3 things. First of all, our strategy has worked well. We are getting much more focused on our long-term strategy. For example, we have a 10 by 10 objective for the group. That is, we want to be 10 times our present size in 10 years' time, which is a compounded annual growth rate of about 26%. Our strategy is working well, and our talent development has been working very well. So we feel we have good years ahead.
So if things have been working right for Godrej and some other groups as well, why is it not going the same way for the Indian economy?
Well, 2 or 3 things. First of all, the Indian economy, the macro economy is affected to a certain extent by the global macroeconomic situation. Also, those parts of the economy which have a lot of interaction with the government, say infrastructure, mining, various other areas like telecom, they are not doing too well because government decision making has become slow for various reasons. Partly it's the anti-corruption movement, partly is the CAG reports. Government internally, the alliance of the government is having some problems, and the political dynamics in parliament are having some problems. So some sectors which have to deal a lot with the government have been negatively affected.
Do you think if companies like Godrej can buck the trend, so to speak, and so, as others are, then maybe we should quit worrying so much about what's happening at the macro level, because in any case we are reaching that or have reached that point where we can do little about it?
Well, we shouldn't worry. What we should do is to see what we should do, what we can do to try and improve the situation. So a continuous improvement mentality is required, not a worrying mentality.
So if you were to look at Godrej's own portfolio of products and services, what do you think has done the best in the last 4 or 5 years, in this period that we've all been a little disappointed?
Our consumer products businesses have done very well. The Indian consumer demand, especially rural demand, has been growing very well. 500 million Indians use one or the other of our products each day, which gives us a very strong cachet in the consumer market. Those businesses have done well. For example, in the last 6 to 8 months, our property development business has had some setbacks, although we have grown very well because we've added many new projects. Our growth rate is over 100%. But the general demand in the sector has taken a beating, partly because of this point I mentioned to you about interaction with the government. So government permissions have become very slow, tardy, and that affects the sector.
And it's interesting because real estate is an area which you've said could become one of Godrej's biggest divisions or departments, and that's an area you seem to be facing some sort of resistance. Now, is there a regret in this that you expended perhaps so much time and effort in?
No, not at all. We still feel it will be our biggest single business over the next 10 years. We have grown very well, but the sector is facing difficulties, and if the sector faces difficulty, then our profitability gets affected.
Right, but if I look at the kind of areas that you're in, some sectors are actually growing faster than the others. Soaps, for instance, seems to be growing very fast, and hair and home are not as fast. And hair, where you have a substantive share, has actually grown the least. Why is that?
Well, our soap business has grown very well because our share is relatively low. Our share in the soap business is only about 12%. And there we have increased share very rapidly. In our household insecticide business, we've grown exceedingly well. Our growth rate has been very high, our share has grown very well. In our hair color business, our rate of growth is a little low because our new initiatives are yet to hit the market in a strong manner. But we expect over the next 2 years, we'll do very well in our hair color business also.
So what is this telling us about the way the Indian consumer is consuming? Again, I'm talking about the same 4 years, and I mean, just to use the same, these products as a proxy to understand the consumer.
No, the consumer is doing well, especially the middle class consumer incomes are rising. Rural consumers are consuming much more than before. What is happening in rural India, if you look at 10 years ago, most people kept body and soul, barely kept body and soul together. Now the disposable income in rural India is rising very high. So the actually discretionary spending may be rising by 20-25% a year in certain cases. So that is helping consumer products companies grow quite well.
The inevitable question, the split between domestic and overseas. Now, when I look at the numbers, your international business has grown better than your domestic business, even if I look at the most recent numbers. Is that a trend that's going to continue in your mind as things are going, or might it reverse?
Yes, our international businesses in Godrej consumer products are mainly in the developing countries. Growth is good in the countries we are in. For example, Indonesia, the African countries, South America. Growth has been good. Even the organic growth in the last quarter, without taking the inorganic growth, was about 31%, which is very good. And if you add the inorganic growth, it was above 60%. We will continue to grow very strongly in our international business, both organically and inorganically. And we expect the growth in our international business will be higher than our Indian business. Although our Indian business growth over the last few quarters has also been very good in the mid-20s.
Right, so countries like, or rather regions like Latin America, where you've had the best performance, what are the lessons that one can take away from there, if any, from their consumption behavior or patterns and so on?
Well, what you can take away is that in relatively low income countries in the developing world, consumer demand is growing across the board. It's not just in India, it's not just in China, it's across the board. And I think that consumer demand will continue to grow as these countries develop. And much of the global growth is coming from developing countries, and in the years to come I see more of the global growth coming from developing countries.
Right, so you've gone about this through a process of acquisitions, and you've done almost 10 acquisitions in the last couple of years. Now, what's the Godrej of, let's say, 2015 going to look like? I mean, will it all get consolidated under one roof, or would you have more acquisitions?
Well, what we are aiming for the group as a whole is what we call a 10 by 10 strategy. We expect to be 10 times our present size in 10 years' time, which is a compounded annual growth rate of about 26%. We think about 15 to 20% growth will come organically. In other words, businesses which are already in our kitty growing the following year. The rest of the growth, coming to 26%, will come inorganically through acquisitions. And this will put us in a very strong position for growth over the next decade.
And do you see, for instance, a tension now? I mean, now that you have a substantial international presence and that growing, I mean, do you see this happening across the board? Do you see other companies also now maybe training the spotlight on their international businesses, which of course they've nurtured in the last maybe half a decade or decade, but maybe thinking that, that could do with more nurturing, because that's where the real growth is going to come from, and India is going to be the base in any case?
Well, I would not say so. From our point of view, and I think from many companies' point of view, Indian growth will continue strongly. But this is an opportunity to add to the growth. So this is not instead of growth in India, this is in addition to growth in India. Indian companies have become quite competitive globally. Size, scale has improved, competitiveness has improved. So this is a great opportunity for Indian companies to grow very strongly. And I think many Indian groups, many Indian companies are seizing these opportunities.
So I guess the bottom line question is, what are the learnings that are coming back? So we are in a phase in India, that is, where growth is moderating, maybe not so much for consumer products, but across the board. How do companies use this period to learn from their markets overseas and then apply it here, or how could they?
I don't think Indian growth is moderating. I think this is a short period. We had a similar year in 2008-9 when growth was low, and in 9-10 and 10-11 we bounced back to an 8.4% growth. So I think this is a short period. I think growth will bounce back, and Indian growth rate will be back to the 8, 9 or even higher level.
So you're saying regardless of how companies like yours do, the economy is going to kick back into action?
I think the economy will do well. I think companies like ours will do even better than the economy does.
Right. But some also would say that you're an eternal optimist.
Well, yes, I am an optimist, and I think my optimism has come true by and large. If you look at what has happened over the last 20 odd years since reform started, I think India has done very well. I don't think we should get overly disheartened in the periods when that growth rate moderates a little bit. We should try and avoid such moderation. Last time when the global economy dipped because of the financial crisis, India did exceedingly well with fiscal stimuli, monetary stimuli to get out of it. Among the large economies of the world, I think we got out of it about the fastest and about the best. Let's hope we can do it again.
Right, so we take a break on that. I'm going to come back and ask you what is really going for India and its companies, particularly the smaller ones, and whether that could really help us grow out of our moderate or slow growth. Stay with us, you're watching Bottom Line. Welcome back, you're watching Bottom Line. Our guest is Adi Godrej, Chairman of Godrej Group. Mr. Godrej, you know, you've said that you're an eternal optimist, and you've also said that you've been proved right mostly in the last 2 decades. What if we look at the flip side and say, what if we really don't grow at the pace we want to? I think it's also about expectations. Our expectations are high as a country. We've seen good times. But what if we don't?
Well, I don't think we should look at it that way. I think we should see what it will take to ensure we have very rapid growth, and then to go about and get that implemented. And if there are short periods where there are difficulties in implementation, we should find solutions and get it done. I think India has tremendous growth ahead of us for 2 or 3 reasons. One is the demography of our country will be extremely positive, especially, say, 5 years from now onwards, because that's when Chinese demography will turn very negative. I think we will overtake China in terms of growth rates from then onwards, and that will allow us to grow very strongly because there will be other advantages. Because Chinese costs will keep rising. India can get very competitive. The new manufacturing policy, if well implemented, can help us get extremely competitive in increasing industry salience in our GDP.
Right.
So there are many reasons why India will grow very well. And I feel that if we get our act right, we will overtake the United States in the size of our economy sometime between 2030 and 2040. Whether it will be early in the decade or late in the decade will depend on how well we manage our macroeconomic fundamentals. Right. And we can overtake China between 2040 and 2050. We can become the world's largest economy, become a reasonably developed country by 2050.
Right. So, I mean, let me still ask you the flip side question. So, you know, as someone who runs a large enterprise, you have to prepare for the worst as well, or prepare for a downturn, right? As Godrej, what's the other side looking like?
No, I don't think, see, we do scenario planning. So very clearly we look at all aspects of the economy. And I don't think we can drop to a very low growth rate for any protracted period of time.
So in your scenario planning, what are your points of concern or the red flags?
Well, in our scenario planning, we are looking at if in the event India for say 2 or 3 years has low growth, how would we, and our answer to that would be we would put even more effort on our international business to make up for the Indian business.
Are you already doing that in some ways?
In a little way, but our Indian business still is going well. So therefore, our emphasis on faster growth in our international business is helping us accelerate the company's growth.
So what's the lesson here? I mean, you know, so we've talked about the consumer at the bottom of the pyramid, and I think your retail business is obviously looking at the consumer somewhere between the middle and the top of the pyramid, or maybe at the top of the pyramid. Are there common threads of...
Well, as India grows, I think Indian consumers will tend to upgrade. More and more people will move from middle income level to upper income level, from lower income level to middle income level. So therefore, the consumption patterns will rise dramatically. And as we get to per capita income of around $5,000, then we will see tremendous growth in consumption across the board. If you look at almost any item today, our per capita consumption is very low. The lower we are in the hierarchy of consumption, the higher the per capita consumption is relative to other countries. Now that we will start moving upwards and we will upgrade our consumption.
So you're saying you're pretty confident,
opportunity.
You're quite confident about the consumption stability at the top end?
Yes, I feel so.
And at the bottom end in some ways?
Very much so.
So it's the middle which is really the problem?
No, even the middle is growing. See, consumption is growing in the country. Remember, the parts of the economy which are not doing too well are the ones which depend on the government. So infrastructure, mining, etc., power, these are not doing too well. And that is why GDP growth has slowed down. Consumption orientation is still doing well.
Right. So if I were to look at, let's say, just almost randomly, let's say pick up your soaps portfolio, I felt that you've not really introduced any new brands except for brand extensions for more than a decade. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, because what new brands have you seen for the last decade?
I've seen none.
New brands are very difficult to establish. It doesn't make sense. Brand extension makes a lot of sense. Just for your information, we have very recently, only about 15 days ago, relaunched our entire Synthol range, especially the Synthol soaps and the deos and talcs, etc. That's a major relaunch. And we are positioning Synthol, which was always a premium product, even more premium. And we expect that will add a lot of value. We have introduced a lot of new variants of number one. In fact, in our soap portfolio, we are the fastest growing soap manufacturing company.
And number one is your largest product by sales?
Number one is our largest soap brand.
Right. So and this seems to apply to your other brands as well. I was looking at Hit and Jet and so on. I mean, no real new brands come into this entire space in the last 10 years. I'm not saying there should be, but is it because
new brands are very difficult to establish? If you look at the global consumer markets, there are very few new brands coming in. It's much more important to ensure that your well-established brands become even better established. And that pattern works extremely well. So for example, in the household insecticide business, we are the largest by far in India. I think our market share is more than double of our next biggest competitor. And our brands are extremely strong. They're growing very well. We have very many innovative products that have helped the brands grow. So our market share has grown by about, our market share has grown by about 4 percentage points over the last year, and we are now at over 40%
so
market share.
I think, which is the bottom line growth question. So therefore, if I were to now extrapolate this, growth, you're saying, even if you look across India Inc. with its entire suite of products and services, growth can continue to come from existing products. We may not need innovation, but we may need innovation, but we may not necessarily need new packaging or new
No,
names.
that also depends. Now, for example,
because the question I'm asking is Indian industry not doing this?
No. Indian industry is doing quite well in terms of new. For example, Godrej Consumer Products has launched a new brand in a category we were in earlier, but that was a licensed product. We had to give it back to Sara Lee. That is air fresheners. We had a brand called AmbiPure, which we had to give to Procter & Gamble because Sara Lee sold it.
And you've just
now
launched
we
Air.
have introduced Godrej Air. Brilliant new products, is doing exceedingly well. In fact, we are short supplied right now. And so that will be a new brand we will establish, but it will be Godrej Air. So the Godrej brand still is the brand, but Air is the sub-brand for this.
So the extension, logical extension to my previous question was that whether Indian industry is getting it right, is Indian industry, and not just Godrej, continuing to understand the customer or the consumer as well as it was perhaps a few years ago?
Yes, I think even better. I think market research standards have improved. In addition to the traditional market research, which we used to do 5 to 10 years ago, there is a tremendous amount of research done in home. In other words, our people visit homes. Even I, from time to time, visit homes and find out from consumers what they are looking for, what they want, how we can satisfy their needs, etc.
So can you tell us what happened in your last visit?
Well, last visit I did in the rural parts, and it was very interesting to see the kind of products even rural households are using. And I was very surprised at the changes that are coming about from a rural visit I had made about 3 years before that. it was very enlightening to see the changes in rural India.
You know, the whole issue of mines and spectrum and all the natural resource related challenges, is that something that companies like you will now be even more wary of, assuming you were thinking of it, any resource related industry?
I think people will be wary of it because of what has happened. What we need is, what I like to look upon this as short-term pain but long-term gain. I hope we will reform the situation. I think what we need is strong policies. Any policy by the government, to my mind, should be transparent and fair. Whether it's an auction, whether it's some other policy, it should be transparent, fair and open to everyone, equally open to everyone. If that is done, I think even these industries will prosper tremendously in India of the future. I think the present pain we are going through will lead to better policies that are transparent and fair.
So last question, when do you see the cycle changing, if at all?
I think 13-14 will be a year of good growth. I expect it will be at least 8%, could be 9% plus.
That's an optimistic note to end on, and which goes back to the original question which I asked you, whether you were feeling optimistic or pessimistic. So I think you've given some reasons for that as well. Thank you very much, Mr.
Good talking to you.